After what feels like a bit of a lifetime, FPL is finally on its way back, and one thing that has been messing with my head over the international break has been whether or not my team needs a wildcard or whether I can push it a week further down the line. This video is going to go into the pros and cons of wildcarding in game week 30, hopefully not just for my team but also for yours if you're considering it, and having a little bit of a look at the landscape over the next few weeks in FPL. So if you enjoyed today's video, leave a like, hit subscribe, that'd be massively appreciated. And let's get in to whether or not wildcarding in game week 30 is absolutely insane or not. Right then, so let's cast our minds all the way back to 2 weeks ago when we were last thinking about FPL. I've put on screen my game week 30 side, which honestly I'd kind of forgotten a little bit about. I've also made an early transfer, which I know is a bit of a sin over an international break, but as you can see, I've got no free transfers in the bank now and nothing in the bank either in terms of money. And that's a big reason as to why I brought in Daniel Munoz all the way back almost 2 weeks ago now. I brought him in for Hall, who's obviously out for the season, so no worries there, but I had the exact money to bring him in, and it did look like Daniel Munoz was going to rise at some point over the international break, and I wanted to just get it done. Now, of course, there is risk attached to doing that because he could get injured, other players could get injured over the international break, and I might have other things to contest with, but I knew that I had the wild card up my sleeve, and if I wanted to use it, I was willing to do so over the international break. And although it wasn't something that I necessarily went into the break thinking I was going to activate, it was something that I was at least open to the possibility for. Now, looking at my side on paper, it might not be awful for game week 30. I've got the two leading captaincy candidates in Haaland and Salah. Everton at home for Salah is currently where I've put my armband, but that could easily swap to Haaland at home to Leicester. And I've got a decent mix of promoted clubs that my players are taking on. I've obviously got Munoz away at Southampton. I've got Ipswich for that double Bournemouth midfield of Kluivert and Semenyo. And Fernandes has looked in great form as well. So it's not a bad side by any means, but there are issues. So Wood is yellow flagged. He picked up an injury on international duty, and he is now confirmed out of the FA Cup clash, that quarter-final that happens before game week 30. So given that he's definitely out for that game, with a complete 100% certainty, according to Nuno anyway, that would make it pretty unlikely that he's fit for Man United. He might recover in time, but it's a significant doubt at this point. Now, I do have Pedro on my bench, which gives me a bit of depth, a bit of cover, and I don't mind playing him at home to Aston Villa. But if there are any other injuries, especially given that Robinson's a doubt after international duty, then I'm starting to look pretty shaky. I'd need a -4 or have to play Greaves away at Bournemouth, which of course I don't ideally want to do. So all of that in mind, and the fact that Pickford's away at Liverpool, you've got Williams playing Man United at home, and I've got Bruno away at Nottingham Forest, so competing against each other there. It's maybe not ideal, and I'm willing to maybe hit that button 1 week early, especially considering not many managers are going to do that, and I'm chasing rank a little bit. So it gives me an opportunity to maybe steal a bit of a march on them in game week 30, get to a side that I like earlier, and then have transfers later on down the line to future plan for that. I've got a lot of other chips left to use. I've got free hit, bench boost, and triple captain. So getting that wild card out the way early might also be slightly helpful to me in that sense as well. So this video, and from here on out, I'll be running through the pros and the cons of hitting the wildcard button in game week 30. And it's what I've been toying around with over the last couple of weeks. Now, again, this is not me saying I'm wildcarding. My wildcard is not active at this moment in time, but I'm open to the possibility of it. So I want to run through the pros and the cons of doing so, more just to have a think about whether I want to or not. And if you have your own thoughts on it, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. Call me crazy if you want to as well. That's absolutely fine. But let me know whether or not you think that I'm coming at this from completely the wrong angle, or maybe there's some merit in some of the pros to wildcarding in game week 30. Right then, so I've built a bit of a pros and a cons list. I had this written down on a piece of paper over the last couple of weeks, and it has been playing on my mind. So this is basically me just mind dumping it to you. On the pro side, there are some pretty strong arguments to hitting it a week early, and most of it relies on the fact that game week 30 has some pretty good fixtures for some sides that I want players from now, and I don't have that coverage, or maybe not the ideal players from those teams. So on the pro side of it, first and foremost, it helps me optimize for game week 30. Now, game week 30 is only one game week, but it is at this point in time 11.1% of the season remaining. So whilst it doesn't seem like a big deal to have the perfect side for one game week, for game week 30, it's over 10% of the season now. So having the perfect or a very good side, a much better side than I've currently got, for one extra game week is a benefit. And I am weighing that up versus what my side currently looks like. Now, secondly, my game week 30 wildcard, on paper at least, at time of recording, is not too dissimilar to what I'd pick for a game week 31 wildcard. So I might not necessarily be at a major disadvantage from hitting that button a week early. The team won't look that different. And some of the sides, and I'll go into this in a minute's time, have good fixtures in both game week 30 and 31. So hitting that button a week early might not be a massive disadvantage in terms of the structure of the side that I would want to look at. Now, obviously, I'll go through the cons in a minute's time, and there are very clear and obvious cons to going a week early. Even if the side did, in theory, look the same, injuries can happen, suspensions can happen. I'll go into that in a moment's time. The FA Cup results will also come before we get to game week 30 as well. So we will maybe not have the complete landscape, but we will have some information to go on. The reason the FA Cup results are important, just a reminder, is that it helps us forecast the blanks and the double game weeks around game week 34, but then also the double in game week 33, or possibly elsewhere as well. What we do know is that the teams that make it through the quarterfinals are very, very unlikely to be able to play their fixture in game week 34, giving them a blank game week that game week. That fixture will then need to be moved to a double game week, most likely 33, but there are other options it could move to. So we will have that information at least on who will be having an FA Cup semi-final to put into game week 34 and therefore unlikely to play in game week 34, and therefore also where they're most likely to have a double game week at some point as well. Another pro, a pretty simple one, is that the wildcard, if you hit it a bit earlier, might be a bit more affordable this week because price rises aren't really happening at the moment. There's not been much movement at all in terms of transfers in the last 2 weeks, and those player prices are going to start moving pretty quickly after we get to the game week 30 deadline. Once that happens, everyone's back in FPL mode, transfers will be flying, and a lot of the players that I do want, even in game week 30, will definitely be getting rises ahead of game week 31, because a lot of people will be transferring in the likes of Crystal Palace, Newcastle players, maybe even other teams that look likely to double in the next few game weeks as well. So price rises are going to make it less affordable for me, and it helps me to maybe go a week early there. Now, I mentioned it briefly there as well, but another big pro, and a reason that I am seriously considering it, is because it gives me the opportunity to attack the Crystal Palace and the Newcastle fixtures. Now, Palace obviously plays Southampton away from home. I've only got one player, and that's Daniel Munoz, who I've already transferred in for Palace this game week. I would like to have more, but I can't do so without a hit. And Newcastle also have a good fixture. At home to Brentford is a decent attacking fixture, and we're going to want both of those teams and assets from both of those teams in game week 31 on a wildcard, and obviously beyond that, game week 32, both of them have the double game week as well. After that, injury issues as well. We can deal with problems like Chris Wood, like Robinson. Gvardiol as well might be a doubt. There are a few others in a few of our sides going around. Wildcarding now means that I don't have to worry about any of that. I can just get to my optimal 11, optimal 15 without worrying about international break injuries. That's obviously a minor benefit to include as well. And finally, I've mentioned it already, it helps me go against the grain a little bit. My rank isn't where I want it to be, quite frankly. I would like to get to the top 100k, and going a week early gives me that extra optimization for one more game week, that 11.1% I talked about earlier, and it means that I can maybe go a little bit different. I can go a little bit more differential, and I can map out a different strategy to maybe those of you who are looking at wildcarding later on down the line. Now, the cons are fairly obvious. Now, number one is, of course, although we'll get the FA Cup results, we might not know what the announcements are for the double game week and maybe even the blank game weeks as well. We might not officially know when those games are going to get moved to, and it might mean that wildcarding now is a bit of a shot in the dark. You don't know for sure when the doubles are going to land, and therefore planning your chip strategy will be very, very difficult unless you get those announcements in the very tight deadline between the FA Cup results and the obvious deadline of the game week 30. With that in mind, the chip strategy will be in the air, most likely for me. I will be able to bring in players that have double game weeks or very likely to have double game weeks, but I won't know necessarily when those doubles will fall, and therefore I won't know when I want to bench boost necessarily or free hit, and my structure of the team will have to be maybe a little bit more hybrid so that I can flex to different strategies given the different ways that the fixtures could fall, and that can be frustrating. If I wildcarded in game week 31 or beyond, I will much more likely know for sure when the doubles are going to happen, when the blanks are going to happen, and therefore I can land on a very exact chip strategy and therefore team structure for the next few game weeks. Another major con is that, as you'll see in a minute, I've built a wildcard draft that currently has both Salah and Haaland in it. Now, if I waited one more game week, I think I'd be slightly more tempted to maybe go without one or the other, and therefore I can spread the value, the money from one of those two players across my 15, optimizing for a bench boost and giving me a stronger team overall. But doing it this week, it feels very difficult to go without either Haaland, who has Leicester at home, or Salah, who has Everton at home. Going without either of those this week feels very, very dangerous. So it would take a brave manager to go for a wildcard this week without both of them, and therefore that could limit you in the next few game weeks, given that your money is going to be majorly thrust towards those two players and not allocated and spread across the 15. Finally, there are obvious injury issues this week, but there could be injury issues over game week 30 that I need to deal with as well. And if I wildcarded in game week 31, then at least I have that information too. Although you would hope that maybe not too many players that you wildcard in get injured straight away. I have had it in the past where I wildcard and then the instant thing that happens is 3 or 4 players get injured straight away in the following game week, and it might feel like I almost need another wild card to get out of it. So that's another con that I definitely need to think about. So those are the pros and cons at the moment as far as I have them. If you have any more on either side of the argument, let me know in the comments below. It would be really, really helpful to me. For now though, I'm sure this is a moment we're all watching this video for. Let's take a look at what my wildcard draft would or could look like, given the fact that we don't have that FA Cup information at the moment. It's obviously still up in the air, but this is what I'm looking at in its current state. Right then, so this is my draft wildcard as it currently stands, and it is obviously important to note that this is very spurious at the moment. A lot can change over the weekend with the FA Cup results, and I will obviously come back and do an official wildcard video if I were to activate the button. But this is why I'm tempted to potentially activate it based on or depending on results over the weekend. Because looking at it, thanks to FPL.team, which is again a fantastic website, do go check it out, completely free to use by the way as well. What I can create for a game week 30 wildcard is hugely tempting. So straight away, in goal, I've got Raya, but I've also got Areola. Now, that is with the bench boost in mind down the line. West Ham likely to have a double game week at some point, and probably at the time other teams will as well. So, although, again, it's very hard to know for sure at the moment, Areola in goal as my bench goalkeeper looks tempting. Raya will play most of the game weeks considering Arsenal's fantastic defensive data, and it means that rather than having Saliba next to Gabriel or Timber for instance, I can not only save a bit of money but also release another defensive spot because there are a lot of defenders that I like the look of on a wild card. So Gabriel obviously has his spot locked in, not going anywhere for me. I've got a bit of value tied up in him. He's got good goal threat and Arsenal defence. I do want to double up on because they are statistically the best in the league by quite a long margin as well. Elsewhere in my defence, I've currently gone for Daniel Munoz. No surprises there whatsoever. Fantastic goal threat. He gets up the pitch. He's effectively playing as a right winger and good fixture in game week 30 against Southampton, double game week in game week 32, and likely or at least a 50% chance currently of having another double game week if they were to progress against Fulham in the FA Cup. I've also gone for Kirkes, who's been one of the form players in the league recently. At home to Ipswich for Bournemouth is obviously a great fixture. I've got triple Bournemouth. I'll go into them in just a moment's time. But Kirkes, despite the data not being great, has been very, very impressive, getting plenty of attacking returns, decent defensively Bournemouth as well. So happy enough given his price to include him on a wildcard draft right now. And then on my bench, I've gone Dan Burn. Again, Newcastle assets. I think it'll be very difficult to not triple up on them, considering the fixtures they've got and considering the fact that they have that double game week in game week 32 as well. Now, elsewhere, I've gone for Wan-Bissaka as that fifth defender, away at Wolves on my bench for now in game week 30, but could come in handy, again, considering that potential double game week later on down the line. But this is very up in the air. I don't want to get too bogged down in that fifth defender or the fifth midfielder. All of that structure stuff will come later on once we know the exact fixture layout, or at least the FA Cup results after the weekend. And then we can start narrowing in on some of the maybe the outside edge pieces like a Wan-Bissaka or a Dan Burn or a fifth midfielder, because we can start dictating that based on the fixtures that we are given after the FA Cup results come in. But for now, what it is important to note is this is very affordable, even with both Salah and Haaland in the draft. Moving into midfield, Salah does make it for now. If you wanted to downgrade him, then you'll have a lot more money to play with, and you can maybe upgrade one or two other spots. Let's say, for example, you didn't have Salah, you went with Palmer, who, although is potentially flagged as well, might be okay and has good fixtures for the next 3 game weeks. The same can be said for Saka as well, who's back in training and might be fit again very, very soon. So if you didn't want to go with Salah, there are other options there that can save you some money. Now, personally for me, I'd find it very difficult to go without Salah, considering his data, his form, the fact that he's unstoppable this season, and the fixtures aren't half bad either. I would find it very difficult to go without him. But if you wanted to save some money, then it's something you could look at. Elsewhere, I've gone for double Palace midfield, Sarr and Eze. Obviously, Eze scored his first goal for England over the international break, looked very good. Sarr's data is absolutely brilliant, and he is a lock on wildcard for me right now. Alongside them, Kluivert makes it. It would be tempting to pick Semenyo if he wasn't on 9 yellow cards. Now, obviously, the period in which he could get banned for ends pretty soon, but given that he only needs 1 more yellow card to get a 2 game week ban, I'm not brave enough to go for that. He is picking up yellow cards at an alarming rate right now, and as an owner, he's been very frustrating. I prefer Kluivert, mainly because he's got better data, he's on penalties, the minutes aren't bad either, and on the eye, he's looked pretty astounding recently as well. So I don't mind that as a double Crystal Palace, Bournemouth midfield, with Salah in there as well. And my fifth midfielder would be a cheapie, but one that I'm actually really looking forward to owning, and that is Murphy. Now, Murphy is still bargain basement price, not bad data at all, and given the injuries and suspensions that Newcastle have had, he has kept his place really solidly recently, and I think that he still maintains his place moving forwards even after Gordon comes back in. And he obviously himself had to withdraw from international duty with an injury too, so we don't know how serious that will be, but it might mean that Murphy has a little bit longer in that starting 11 anyway. So again, lots can change here, and you can move the money away from Salah or Haaland potentially, but there are plenty of cheap midfielders that can make this wildcard very affordable and set you up for a bench boost down the line. Now, in the forward line, you've got the 3 forwards that I think will be very popular, or 3 of 4 forwards that will be popular. Haaland is a lock for me. Great fixture at home to Leicester, potentially captainable, and then a very likely double game week down the line. Either Villa make it through against Preston or Man City make it through against Bournemouth. If either of those things happen, it triggers a double game week for Man City down the line at some point. So Haaland seems like a very good pick. You could look at maybe contesting that and going with Marmoush, saving 7-8 million, and then obviously upgrading elsewhere. That is another consideration, and there's a lot you can do with that money too. You could even have a second premium in midfield, like a Saka, like a Palmer. So just as an example, all that would take is one move, downgrading Haaland, and you could have a lot more strength in that midfield, maybe even a Bruno, for instance, or a Gordon if he were to come back in sooner rather than later, all possible if you remove either Haaland or Salah. Elsewhere, Isak is going to have 100% ownership on a wild card. I don't think I need to discuss that too much. He's obviously phenomenal, great data, great output, and we've already discussed the Newcastle fixtures. He's the absolute lock for a Newcastle asset on a wild card. Finally, that third forward, Evan Nilsson will be very popular. He's come back in, he's looked sharp. His minutes haven't been astounding, but they're building him up. Obviously, he's been out for a little while now, and I think that the data reflects a very strong option for that forward line at his price point. Now, the other player that I'd love to squeeze in on a wildcard is Jean-Philippe Mateta, who has been declared fit for the FA Cup game against Fulham, which goes ahead before game week 30, so we should be fine for game week 30. Now, I would have to get rid of probably Eze to make space for Mateta, but I think a combination of Evan Nilsson and Eze is slightly better than a combination of Mateta and Semenyo, as an example. So I need to maybe have a think about that combination, but I do really like Mateta, and again, some more thought will go into this and the exact structure of the edge pieces if we get those FA Cup results over the weekend, then it looks more likely that I'll need to actually hit that button. But no question about it, you're looking at 4 or 5 very strong candidates for forwards. Haaland, Isak, Evan Nilsson are definitely up there. You can also look at the likes of Mateta. You can look at the likes of Marmoush as a downgrade from Haaland potentially as well. But all of this is to say that this wildcard, as I keep mentioning, is far from locked in, and my wildcard itself is not active. But I wanted to weigh up the pros and cons in this video and have a look at what it might look like if results fall a certain way, and if we get injury news that maybe goes against me over the coming days. It is an opportunity, I think, and that 11.1% of the season that I can optimize for game week 30 is tempting, especially considering that triple Palace and triple Newcastle is pretty tempting to have a week early considering the fixtures. And although I'm not able to play all of those Newcastle assets at home to Brentford, I could play them considering the fixture, and it keeps them in place ready to go for game week 31 and beyond when they've got good fixtures as well. So let me know what you think of this. Obviously, it is very much a personal preference thing, and there are plenty of cons that go against me needing to wildcard in game week 30, but it's something that I've got in the back of my mind. It's been playing on my mind a little bit, so I thought I'd do a video on it just to describe where my thought process is at the moment. If you've enjoyed today's video, I'd appreciate it if you could hit a like and subscribe to the channel. In the meantime, welcome back to FPL. It's been a bit of a nice break, I'm not going to lie, but ready to go again. Hopefully you are too, and I'll see you in the next couple of days as we get more information from the FA Cup and we start looking at locking our teams in ahead of the game week 30 deadline.